We'll give people another minute or two to join. As you're joining, please go ahead and put your name and organization in the chat so we know that you're here. All right, let's go ahead and get started. We are recording, FYI, so we will send out the recording and the presentation later to participants. Welcome. You are at the 2025 Community Development Fund Notice of Funding Availability Workshop, so hopefully you're in the right place. If you are an ongoing applicant, there won't be much new to you, but we appreciate your coming. We're here to just sort of review how the NOFA process works and the timeline and things like that. And we also have a speaker we're excited about, so we'll talk about that. Caitlin, can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So just quickly, we'll go through the agenda. So we'll give you kind of an overview framework of what the Community Development Fund is, including what the different funding sources are. We will talk through the NOFA, the purpose and requirements, and go through application instructions. We'll also talk through what the application questions are and hopefully have opportunities for you all to ask questions. And then, as we like to do, we also are doing a workshop with a speaker to sort of help with your technical capacity building. And we're really excited. Erica Moore from the county's communications and engagement team is going to be doing a presentation on telling your story. So I'm excited about that. I think that'll be great. So again, as you're coming in, please put your name and organization in the chat. So next, and please mute yourself. All right, so just a quick introduction to the team. If you're an ongoing subrecipient, I'm sure you've met most of us, but I'm Jennifer Daniels. I manage the Community Development Fund. Zina Abdul Rahman is our administrative grant specialist. She will work with you all on any Zoom grants questions or billing questions, things like that. Andrew Hartzig is our management and budget analyst. I don't think he's on today, but he makes sure that you get paid, so he's important. And Caitlin Jones and Roldan Nad are both community development planners who are also responsible for monitoring subrecipients and programs. So if you are awarded a grant or if you're an ongoing subrecipient, they will work with you on developing agreements, outcome measures, invoicing, reporting, all that good stuff. Next slide, please. So just an overview of the Community Development Fund. It is a competitive grant program that the county has operated for, I want to say 40 some odd years, and it has 4 different funding sources. The Federal Community Development Block Grant, or CDBG, the Local Affordable Housing Investment Fund, or AHIF, Federal Community Services Block Grant, which comes from the feds through the state, and also the State Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, or which is CSBG TANF. And we'll be talking about that in some detail. Again, you won't be applying for a specific funding source. We just think it's helpful for you to kind of understand the parameters of these different funding sources. Next slide, please. Thanks. So just again, a quick overview of how the funding works. CDBG and CSBG are 1-year renewable grants. So if you're awarded that, you can apply year after year for the similar program. AHIF services, so the Affordable Housing Investment Fund is the county's local trust fund for affordable housing. The vast majority of it goes for sort of bricks and mortar projects. However, the county board usually puts aside a certain amount. This year was $300,000 for services. So these are services that are related to resident services, to helping people who are in affordable housing. These are awarded for 2 years and they're non-renewable. So if you were awarded an AHIF grant last year, you don't need to reapply for this year for the same project. In addition to sort of the funding sources, we have different eligibility requirements for the types of grants and the amounts we can award. The vast majority of grants are called public services, and those are eligible to request up to $50,000. Most of the grants that are in the public services category are really between 20 and 30,000. And those are programs that are for eviction and homelessness prevention, job training, health-related programs, youth and senior programs, immigration legal services. So the kinds of programs that really sort of support residents, we call public services. There's also other programs that are eligible for up to $100,000. Those are housing development, homeownership counseling if it leads specifically to property acquisition, rental and owner housing rehabilitation, certain economic development programs, including business development, so microenterprise and small business assistance programs. So because of the way that the funding is organized, those are eligible for up to $100,000. Our disclaimer is always our federal funds are awarded through the federal appropriations process, so funding availability may not be known until spring 2024. So as we're going through this process, we're working based on a projection. We don't tend to know the actual amount until spring, so that may or may not shift recommendations. The next slide, please. So here's just a quick overview of previously funded programs for last year. We have that by category. As you can see, we fund a lot of different things. The bulk go to housing programs, job training programs, youth programs we've been funding quite a lot of, and economic development tend to be the largest, but we fund lots of other kinds of programs as well. Next slide, please. So general eligibility requirements, and this is all in the NOFA, but just to kind of remind you all, who is eligible are nonprofit 501c3 organizations that serve Arlington residents. You don't have to be based in Arlington, but the grant will fund, whatever work you do in Arlington. Your proposal needs to be responsive to the goals and objectives of Arlington's 5-year consolidated plan, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later. Activities must be delivered from an ADA and Section 504 compliant location. If your office is not ADA accessible, then you need to show us or explain where you will be offering the service, where you'll be doing outreach, that kind of thing. Programs sponsored by faith-based organizations are eligible, but they must deliver services and outreach regardless of program beneficiary religious affiliation. You must serve primarily low to moderate income beneficiaries, and the income guidelines do vary based on the funding source, and we'll talk about that in a little more detail later. And again, you would not be applying for a specific funding source. So these are just to give you sort of overall parameters. You're really applying, for your program, and then staff will match programs to the funding source, sort of given funding availability, your income, your eligibility, the kind of beneficiaries that you're serving, et cetera. So next slide, please. So just again, to give you sort of an overview of the different funding sources, CDBG must comply with Title 24 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 570. We don't expect you to know all of the regulations. Staff can certainly help you be compliant, but just so you're aware that that is the funding, the eligibility requirements. Programs must respond to a CDBG national objective. Most of our CDBG programs, the national objective that they serve is based on serving low and moderate income people. So most of them, they're eligible if you serve clients up to 80% of the area median income. Under CDBG, direct assistance or income payments are not eligible. We often get people who apply for that, rent assistance, subsidies, gift cards, money that goes directly to beneficiaries are not eligible under CDBG. Additional federal compliance requirements might apply, including the National Environmental Policy Act, Fair Housing Act, Davis-Bacon wage rate. So there's lots of federal requirements that may apply to your program. If they do, we would work with you on that and making sure that you're compliant. Next slide, please. So AHIF services, again, this is the sort of set aside from our bricks and mortar program. Eligible programs generally involve services that directly support residents of committed affordable housing or residents living in market rate affordable units. So they really tend to be housing-based programs. They must be related to housing and/or economic stability. Funds are generally reserved for new startup demonstration projects or involve the expansion of a current program. So AHIF projects, if you've been awarded funding for one, are nice because, again, it's a 2-year program. They tend to be larger funding amounts than the other ones. However, they are non-renewable. Direct assistance or income payments, again, is not eligible under AHIF. And we do use CDBG income and reporting requirements. So you can serve clients up to 80% of the area median income. Next slide, please. Community services block grants programs must comply with Title 45 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 96. CSBG serves lower income clients up to 200% of the federal poverty level. And actually, the CSBG regulations require that you only serve residents up to 125% of the federal poverty level, which, as you know, is really, really low income. But starting with COVID, they bumped it up. So until further notice, if you receive CSBG funding, you can serve clients up to 200%. Under CSBG, direct assistance may be eligible. However, we do ask that you please discuss this with us ahead of time because there are some sort of funky pieces to that. Next slide, please. Community Services Block Grant, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, CSBG TANF, can also serve clients up to 200% of the federal poverty level. There are specific requirements that are sort of TANF related, if you're familiar with the TANF program. The families that you're serving must include a minor child less than 18 years old who resides with the family. Services or payments cannot be considered assistance. So this is also kind of funky if you're looking at doing direct payment and assistance. And all costs incurred must relate to work subsidies, education and training, childcare, transportation, and non-recurrent short-term benefits, which cannot extend beyond 4 months. So essentially, the purpose of TANF is to help people get work and sort of the supportive services around that. Next slide, please. So here's just a quick overview of the 2023 income limits. This is also in the NOFA. It's also listed on our website. So these are limits that are determined by HUD. What else should I say? So this gets updated every spring. So if you were awarded funding, you would be subject to the 2024 income limits. But again, we'll kind of notify you about what those are. Next slide, please. So just a quick overview of the excuse me, the county's consolidated plan. The consolidated plan is a 5-year planning document that we need to submit to HUD, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, to sort of outline our goals and strategies for housing and community development over the next 5 years. We have 4 goals. I'm not going to go over them in a ton of detail, but just to give you an overview. Goal 1 is about creating and sustaining affordable housing. So you can see that that's really around kind of increasing supply, helping households to become homeowners, that kind of thing. Goal 2, promote healthy and self-sufficient families, is a lot of the programs I think that most of you all work on. Really related to helping keep families in housing, helping keep them stable, helping people to build economic self-sufficiency. So as you can see, there's a lot of different strategies around that. Excuse me, next slide, please. Goal 3 is to stabilize families at risk of homelessness. So that's really helping people who stay out of homelessness or who become homeless, helping them out of homelessness. Goal 4 is to foster vibrant and sustainable neighborhoods. So that's really our kind of our place-based goal. So that's helping residents in specific neighborhoods, and we can talk more about what neighborhoods those are to help develop and revitalize those neighborhoods. Next slide, please. So the timeline is also in the NOFA, and if you've done this before, you should be familiar. Proposals are due the Friday after Labor Day, so Friday, September 8th. Proposals are reviewed by staff and the Community Development Citizens Advisory Committee in September through November. If you're not familiar, the Community Development Citizens Advisory Committee is the citizen commission that really helps us develop proposals and develop recommendations. So we work very closely with them. We will invite you to make a presentation on your proposal at one of the CIDSAC meetings in October and November. So those are the Wednesdays through October, and we do the first Wednesday in November if we need to. So there's more information in the NOFA, but we'll invite you to come sort of present more on your presentation. Let us know anything that maybe you didn't cover, kind of any highlights that you'd like to focus on. So this whole process happens, county staff makes recommendations, and then recommendations are released as part of the county manager's proposed budget in next February. There are a couple of opportunities for public hearings, so you and or constituents, beneficiaries, clients can come talk about the programs that you're requesting funding for. The final budget is adopted in 2024, and then funds are available in July 2024, so a year from now for fiscal year 2025. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to Caitlin, who's going to talk through the specifics of proposals and how to submit them.
Great. Thanks, Jennifer. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to submit your proposal. All proposals must be submitted through our online application management software called Zoom Grants. If you've applied for funding from us before, you're likely familiar with this program. I've linked some videos and resources here about how to actually submit an application. So when you get this presentation, you'll be able to click right into that, and it'll show you exactly how to create your application and fill in the narratives. All this information is also in the NOFA and on our website, so just keep that in mind. If you've again previously applied for funding through the Community Development Fund, you just log back into your existing account and you'll be able to see open programs that through Arlington County. As far as what the requirements are for each proposal, so there are several proposal narratives that you'll be required to submit, and I'll go through those in a little bit more detail in a few minutes. There's also a proposal budget and narrative that's required. You're required to indicate what the performance measures or indicators will be for your program over the program year, and there are several attachments that that you'll need to attach for your proposal. So it's your Form 990, your tax exempt status. There are only a few proposal submission items that are optional, but if you are awarded funding, you'll be required to submit the remainder of the documentation that is in the list. As far as the NOFA questions, I'm just going to go through kind of what we're looking for under each of these areas. And if you have questions, we can talk about it at the end. But the first section talks about overall program design. So you're going to, in this first question, provide a brief project synopsis. You're going to be structuring your scope, the project scope of work. And you want to be able to, the reviewer is going to want to tell upfront what population is being served and what your program is really trying to accomplish. Question number 2, what is the designated time frame for the project? So this is where you're going to explain what your work plan is, and it just describes the general flow of your program. So in months 1 through 3, we'll be focusing on recruiting. Months 4 through 6, we'll be operating our trainings, that kind of thing. We want to know specifically what exactly you're planning to do throughout the program year. Question number 3, define the geographic area to be served. So this is where you're going to talk about where the program will be located. If you're going to be operating your program in a specific Arlington neighborhood, this is a great opportunity to let us know in this question where that will be. Also, make sure you note how many Arlington clients versus clients from other neighboring jurisdictions you'll be serving. It's helpful to understand what your impact will be as far as your overall program delivery. And also make sure that you indicate whether if you're going to be operating in a specific neighborhood, whether you have support from the community or the immediate surrounding community to operate that program. So moving on to the next question, describe this next section talks about community needs, and this is where you're going to be establishing what unmet need you're going to be working to meet in the community. So the first question, describe and document the extent and nature of the unmet need that your proposal addresses. So this is where you're going to ensure that your application provides specific evidence or data identifying the local need. Are you serving an underrepresented or non-traditional group that has barriers to accessing services? In this question, make sure that you're talking about local data, or even if it's not specifically quantifiable, anecdotal data is totally fine. We've noticed in years past, some applicants have focused on, pulling in national data. That's fine, but you should always try to describe how that national data fits into a local context. Question number 5, what level of community support currently exists to address this unmet need, and what makes this program proposal unique or different from existing services? So this is where you're going to describe whether the unmet need is currently being addressed, or whether it's or if it's not being addressed to the extent that is needed. So why is your program or organization uniquely situated to help solve this problem? And the reviewer should really understand if there are other organizations that are already working in this space. Question number 6, what do you anticipate the program will accomplish? This is where you'll talk about, what the overall goals are. Your reviewer should understand the specific project activities and how you intend to serve your program beneficiaries, and again, specifically what you're hoping to accomplish for the community. Moving on to the next section, collaboration and coordination with other organizations. Again, it's pretty self-explanatory. You're just going to talk about if you're going to be working with other nonprofits, other community organizations, other businesses to help carry out your program. The next section talks about long-term strategies and project sustainability. I want to talk a little bit about this section in a little bit more detail, because I think there's generally some confusion about what exactly we're looking for here. So question number 8 asks to describe the long-term strategy of your project and detailed plan for project sustainability and eventual economic independence. So this question, we're really looking for a clear idea as to whether how you plan to establish self-sufficiency for your program, not necessarily for your clients, but for your program. So what we mean by that is, how are you building your program budget over the year to eventually potentially not need community development fund funding. So in 5 years, 10 years, are you fundraising? Are you working with, additional funders? Are you, looking for additional resources? Tell us how you're planning to sort of build out your program so that you can it can eventually be self-sufficient. Question number 9, if requesting additional funds over the amount awarded in the previous year, please describe in detail what the additional funds would be used for. So I want to be really clear that for this question, if you are requesting additional funding over the amount that you were awarded, so say you were awarded in fiscal year 2024, $20,000 and you're looking for 25, tell us what that additional $5,000 is going to be used for. Maybe you need to hire more staff. Maybe the price of your equipment or materials has increased. We need to know exactly why your program is requesting additional funding. So moving on to the next section, this is where you're going to talk about your goals, your objectives, and the outcome and evaluation plan. So the first question, describe your project's overall goals and objectives. So this is where you want the reviewer to be able to pinpoint the long-term goals and actionable strategies for your program. So I'm going to use an example of a job training program. So the goal of the job training program could potentially be to stabilize families and ultimately decrease barriers to employment. And the objectives within that goal would be to host training sessions or provide one-on-one individualized training. So be sure that you're very specific about what objectives, your strategies you're going to use to achieve your goals. The next question, number 11, it'll be a checklist in the application, and it just asks you to identify which consolidated plan goals and objectives you will be meeting, and it just allows us to better understand how exactly your program will fit into the overall consolidated plan goals. For the question number 12, provide an evaluation plan detailing the intended outcomes and outputs of the program. So this is where you're going to tell us what exactly you're going to be measuring, how you're going to be measuring the success of your program. So the evaluation plan should not only describe what the outputs and outcomes are, though, they should also talk about the methodology you will use to obtain your data. So I'm going to use the job training program example again. So an output for a job training program could be the number of clients served, or the number of workshops held, number of people who are attending your workshops. And the methodology within that would be to count the number of clients that participate in each workshop. So in addition to those outputs, we're also going to want to know the outcomes of your program. So the outcomes of a job training program could potentially be to helping the number of clients that you help to obtain employment, or the number of clients that increase their income. It's a little harder to capture data for, but you could, for example, the methodology for counting that information could be to, follow clients over a certain number of months to see if they're obtaining employment or if their wage has increased. So again, you're going to be want to be really specific here. Not only include this information in your evaluation plan in this question, but you're also going to want to put that information into your program evaluation form, which we'll talk about in a minute. The next section is where you're going to talk about your organization, provide a description of the overall organization and your experience. So again, question 13 asks to provide a brief description of your organization to ensure that the reader understands the history of the organization and why you're uniquely situated to carry out the program. Question number 4 asks for names and job descriptions for the personnel who will be directly implementing the project. There's an opportunity for you to provide description of partner organizations and also the staff from those organizations that will be helping you to or involved in the planning or implementation of the project. The next section talks about organizational capacity and program performance. And this question, question number 16 is describe your organization's demonstrated ability to carry out this program if the program has received a community development fund grant in the past. Describe the impact that prior year funding had on the community. So this is really an opportunity for you to talk about how your program has been successful in the community in the past, what impact you've had. If you have been awarded a grant in the past, you can talk about client story. You can pull in client stories and talk about how they've succeeded and how your program has sort of helped them get there. So those are all the narratives that you'll be required to submit. Again, all the narratives are marked as required in Zoom grants, so you will not be able to submit your application without answering all the questions. The next section you're going to be filling out is your budget. And these are just some quick budget tips to make sure that you are submitting the most detailed budget that you can along with your application. So make sure that you are familiar with the allowable and unallowable cost principles and guidelines published in the 2 CFR Part 200, which is the Uniform Administrative Requirements. These are the administrative requirements that we follow for all of our funding sources, and this details what are considered allowable and unallowable costs. Make sure that you clearly and very specifically detail the salary and fringe costs for each of the personnel who will be working on the project. There are quite a few programs that submit applications, or organizations that submit applications for programs, and they're asking to fund their staff to carry out the program. That is absolutely fine. You can pay for staff, but you have to be very specific about what their salary is and what their fringe costs are. Please do not lump multiple salaries into one line item. We want to be able to see the exact amount that you're going to be that you're proposing for each staff that will be working on the project. Make sure that you specify the position titles, hourly rates, and estimated number of hours in the budget narrative. And you're also eligible to include up to 10% of your budget towards indirect costs. We encourage you to do this. Most programs do incur indirect costs as they're implementing their programs. If you're curious about what an indirect cost is, you can either reach out to me. It's also in the NOFA, and it's also detailed in the Uniform Administrative Requirements. I will say that there are certain organizations that have federally negotiated indirect cost rates. If you have one of those, you are able to request up to that federally negotiated rate, but everyone else has to be below 10% of below 10% of their requests can be towards indirect costs. The next slide just talks about the evaluation criteria that you'll be scored against. It really does follow the application and the narratives pretty closely. The reviewers are looking at the overall program design and proposal elements. We're looking at the goals and objectives and the outcomes and the evaluation plan that you detail. We're looking at the feasibility of your budget and whether you're leveraging additional sources. And then we're looking at the capacity and experience of your organization and the individuals who will be carrying out the program. The total proposal score is up to 100 points. And again, both staff and members of the Community Development Citizens Advisory Committee will be reviewing all applications. So here are just some quick proposal tips. And, obviously there's if you have questions, feel free to either ask them at the end of this or reach out to any member of the Arlington County staff to, if you have any additional questions. But in terms of proposal tips off the bat, make sure that you're reading the notice of funding availability carefully for the eligibility requirements. Again, you're not applying for one specific source, but if you have a source in mind, make sure that you are indicating, or you're reading what those eligibility requirements are so that you are aware whether your program would be eligible. Make sure that you're documenting the leverage, what you're leveraging through additional sources in your budget. You're welcome to include in-kind sources, such as if your program relies on volunteers. Make sure that you're following the volunteer rate that is outlined in the NOFA. And include as much leverage as you possibly can, because you will be scored on that as well. You're allowed to include up to 3 letters of support along with your application. I highly recommend that you do this because it really does demonstrate whether your program has the support from either your partners or the community or other clients or beneficiaries that you're going to be working with. And we really do encourage, if you're a new applicant, we really do, or existing applicants, it's really up to you. But we do encourage you to contact county staff with questions about whether your program is eligible, or to just bounce program ideas off of us. We're going to be around the rest of the summer, so if you have questions, feel free to contact us. And I think the next slide just goes into questions. I've seen a few questions in the chat, so I will. I don't know, Jennifer, is there anything you didn't answer in the chat?
The value of non-professional volunteers, I think we update that in the Bureau of Labor Statistics annually in the NOFA, is that right?
Yeah, so let me, I will pull that up right now. I don't have it off the top of my head, but it is in the NOFA. I will pull that up.
Yes, that's updated every year by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So if we don't have it, you can look it up, but I'm pretty sure we updated it. Thank you. Do we have other questions? I also to remind you, if you have not put your name and organization in the chat, please do so.
So for volunteer in-kind hours, you can use $31.80 per hour, which is the 2023 Bureau of Labor Statistics volunteer hourly standard for Virginia. Thank you.
If we've previously applied, is it possible to get the notes, comments from our application? We're happy to meet with you. We don't tend to do a feedback letter, but we're happy to meet with organizations to sort of provide feedback from last year's review. So feel free to reach out to Caitlin to schedule that. Other questions?
Hi, I just wanted to, this is Kathy Paul. I just wanted to clarify, if we received an AHIF grant and are interested in finding, continuing funding for it, is it possible to reapply to the Community Development Fund with the idea that another funding source would be used, or is it not allowable?
It's not allowable. We don't encourage that. I mean, the idea behind the AHIF, as I mentioned, really is to sort of help do a startup kind of program. You may want to consider putting in an application for a different aspect of the program or a different program. But again, we would encourage you to reach out and talk directly with staff about that.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer.
Sure. I see a couple people saying, when will the application be posted on Zoom Grants? It should be posted, so there must be something funky going on. So we will figure that out.
You might need to go directly to our website, and I will put the link in the chat, and click on the apply via Zoom Grants. Sometimes if there's, it depends on what, Zoom guides can be glitchy. Let's just put it that way. So I would try to go through our website first. If you're still not able to access the 2025 application, then reach out to us and we'll try to figure out what's going on.
You roll good numbers. Go big, car, go home, no car.
Other questions? We were so clear. Okay. Well, again, just to encourage you, do reach out. We love working with you all as you're developing proposals, because then that way we're not wasting anybody's time. Hopefully you can develop a proposal that is strong, and we can kind of help you, figure out what to apply for and how to frame it. So if that's your only takeaway, please take that. So now I'm excited to introduce Erica Moore, who is our Communication and Engagement Manager with the Department of Community Planning, Housing and Development, because it's a mouthful. Erica is actually previously a journalist, and we love her because she has both the she's very good at sort of writing the communication stuff, but also is very good at sort of the journalist, knowing how to do headlines and how to tell stories really well. So we asked her to come talk to you all about that. We know that, organizations are always looking for ways to do that, both through fundraising, but also just to let the community know kind of what you're working on and what kinds of outcomes that you have. So I'm going to turn it over to Erica, and I'm going to try to share my screen. So give me a moment while she gets started.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hello, everyone. As Jennifer said, my name is Erica Moore, and I'm just going to walk through some of the storytelling ways I think about storytelling, how to find your stories, how to build a good story, and then how to share a story. And when I say how to share a story, I'm actually talking about when you're given an opportunity, whether that's an interview or you have you're invited to an event, you're doing something out in the community. What are you doing in the moment to do that, and how are you so successful there? So to start with, though, I want to get a sense of where everybody is in the room, because I have a feeling we probably have a wide range of experiences here. So I'm going to launch a couple of poll questions. Jennifer, if you want to go to the next slide, and then I'll launch it. And you'll see pop up on your screen 2 questions. One, if someone spontaneously asked you to tell them about your organization, how would you feel about responding? Like, what would you feel good about that? Oh, Jennifer, we lost you in terms of sharing screen.
Sorry, I'm coming back. I shared weirdly, so yeah.
No worries. And then the other is on a scale of 1 to 5, how confident are you in your ability to, or how often do you share your organization's story? Is that a daily occurrence for you? Is that something you almost never have to do there? So it's going to pop up on your screen here. And names aren't recorded, so you can just go ahead and vote there, and will give us a sense of, and you'll see the arrows down at the bottom. And you can go to the next question. There. We'll give folks a moment to answer those questions, and then just hit the submit button there. Are folks seeing that pop up on their screen?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Let's take a look here. I got to X out of myself. I don't get to take the poll. All right. So let's see, 21 responses. All right, it's not letting me see the results. All right. Well, I'll come back and I will, here we go. There we go. Oh, all right. 95% of you feel like you have your elevator pitch. Well, then I hope that I am not going to bore you, because you might know all of these things. Maybe it'll be reassuring to you to know what to do. And then you're about a 3.6 average, with people about 3 to 4. 3 to 4s, meaning you're doing it multiple times a week and you're talking about your organization. So that's helpful. All right, and I would ask that if you all have thoughts or anything, please bring them into the room and put them in the chat. I definitely want this to feel interactive as well, and I'll do my best to recognize when folks have comments and questions and bring those out. All right, next slide. So as I said, the first part of this is really finding your story. And what do I mean by that? So next slide. It's really what makes a story, and the top thing is really focusing on people. It can be really easy to get bogged down in numbers and things like that, but the people are really where your stories are at. And then understanding the why of yourself and of your organization is really critical, and getting comfortable talking about that. And then when you have to use statistics, using them strategically in a way that doesn't feel overwhelming. Next slide. So when I talk about focusing on the people, it's really, it's the people you serve, of course, your clients, your customers, but it's also the folks that your staff, your volunteers, even your donors can be gold mines of content. And people always think, oh, I got to talk about the people and their stories, but the projects that they're working on, whether that's a physical project, a capital project, or anything like that, those are people-oriented stories, and the work that is really happening out there. Even just highlighting them day to day and putting faces to the work that you do can really be an important part of your story. Most of you are probably already doing this, but if you're not, or if you have a staff member who's more admin or in the office who aren't necessarily in the field doing the work, it's a great opportunity to send sort of a new person out into the field. Not only can you find stories that way with a fresh eye, but you open yourself up to the possibility of doing things like firsthand accounts and things like that that can be really, really exciting. And if you have social media, consider doing takeovers. So have a client, a staff member, a volunteer, or somebody go around and actually take over your social media for the day and let people see the work that you do through their eyes. And of course, put out a call for the stories. You can use your social media. You can use your website, of course. It never hurts to ask if somebody would be willing to be a part of something. You never get what you don't ask for. So it can feel very awkward sometimes for people, but I think the most important thing you can do is ask if somebody's willing to be highlighted and have their story told by you. Next slide. So what's your why? The why is really so critical. And a lot of times we think we got to go out and find the stories, but really the stories may be even closer than we think. It really starts with your staff. It starts with you. So if you have staff and volunteers, consider doing a brainstorming session and having them sit down and put down on paper, why did you want to work for this organization? Why did you want to donate your time to this organization? Your donors, or if you have board members, why did you choose this organization to be a part of, to give your money to give your time to, over all of the other organizations out there? And then ask yourself why you are passionate about the work that you do. Sometimes we can get into the day-to-day and we can kind of forget our own why there. And as you do that in a group, I really recommend having people practice it. So if you have a board meeting, a retreat, a staff meeting, anything like that, use this as an activity there. And you can start, it's a really great thing to practice where you can start, have folks write down what their why is, what their answer to that question is, and then have them turn to a partner and share that story back and forth. And then after they've done that, have them go to a group, a small group, 3-4 people, and have them tell that. And then see if they're comfortable sharing it in front of the entire group. Because as folks start to tell that story more and get used to really talking about it, then that starts to roll off their tongue and they have their own personal elevator pitch about why it matters. And then when they're out in their networks and out in their community, outside of your organization, they're much more likely to be able to talk about what you do and why it's important in a very succinct way, which can only increase your organization's reach there. So next slide. If you're talking about statistics, I always say choose strategically. So all of your statistics should relate back to the people that you're talking about. It should relate back to your why. If you're talking about a client who was well served by a program, or a school that was well served by a service that you provided, or a good that you were able to provide, bring those stats back to that. Make it all about the people. If you need to use a lot of numbers, or you feel really strongly that you want to, try to use ones that are relatable and not too jargony and wonky. It's really easy to have all of your budget numbers and things like that and then in there. But if we can turn them into something that's relatable, we all know stats that are like enough trash to reach to the moon and back. If you can really turn that into something that feels much more tangible to people, that's a much better way to use statistics than just rattling off numbers. But if you need to use your statistics, I always recommend putting them online, creating a sort of a sub-page for your data or a data hub. And then that way, when you're out and you're telling your story and you're talking and communicating with the folks that you serve and the people that you want to donate and who you're trying to raise money for, you can direct them back to some of that deeper dive into the statistics without it becoming the entirety of your story. All right, next slide. So as we talk about where you can find your story, then you have to get comfortable in how to actually write your story. And so next slide. And how to build that story. Where to start? I always start with creating a framework. We all got used to writing outlines in school for essays, but the framework of your story can be macro, like what is the overarching story of our organization, and then what are the individual stories that tell that larger picture, or it can be a framework for your individual story. This person, this client, this staff member, whatever it may be, has a great story that I want to tell. How do I best get that across? So next slide. So if you talk about the framework, I would say run a show is what we do for events, as you all probably know. But I always like to develop what I call as a run a show for my storytelling. It feels a little bit more active than just an outline. So I run through who my audience is, what the purpose of this storytelling is. Is it for fundraising? Is it for awareness building? Is it just because you really want to tell a really compelling story for an article or for a speech or anything like that? And what's the medium? How is this story going to be going out? Is this video? Is this online? Is this in a printed newsletter? Things like that. And then I always say, take time to develop the questions that you want to be answered by this story. So if you're thinking about your goals and your mission, how can you ask questions that this story will tie back to those missions and those goals? By laying those out ahead of time, it's kind of the opposite of talking points. It's brainstorming questions that you could get asked, that you want to ask, and that ensures that your story stays on track and stays on message, because it can be really interesting to sit down and talk to somebody and suddenly you're off on all of these tangents. But if you have those questions that are really tied to your mission and the goals of your organization, and you know where you want your story to go, it just makes it a lot more concise and purposeful there. If you are creating your own stories, always think about it in the with the idea of how could this be put out into the public? How could I potentially pitch this out there? I always say the news comes in C's. Change, conflict, controversy, and celebrity are things that are always going to be news to media organizations. Of course, when I say conflict, it doesn't mean like an actual negative conflict, just things that are in conflict. An example, here at the county, I was in the manager's office before I came here to CPHD, and during COVID, there was a whole operation to really work with people who were unhoused in our community in motels in the area, so we could keep them quarantined as they needed and things like that. And we were able to do a story about a volunteer. And through that volunteer's eyes, we were able to tell a story about how we were addressing an unexpected and a complex need in the conflict of how do you work with people who are unhoused and keep them housed and quarantined for safety, for their own safety and others. And then also for I call this a celebrity. So when I say celebrity, I don't mean like the Kim Kardashians and the Brad Pitts of the world necessarily, but just putting a little bit of a spotlight on folks. We also did again during COVID. We had a video that was done on the logistics and distribution warehouse, which was a behind the scenes look at how the county managed all the supplies that it needed for its COVID-19 response. And we were able to put a highlight on the men and women who were doing tireless work to ensure that we had everything that we needed. And they were able to talk through there was a quote at the very beginning that at one point the county was down to 40 gowns for public health workers. And then there was another one, they were talking about the hundreds of thousands of Band-Aids that were needed to launch a vaccine center. So just being able to highlight some of those stories can be really good. And we were able to get pickup on both of those from the media there. The media is often looking for stories. They are, as a former journalist, I will tell you, they are stretched thin. I covered local government when I was a reporter and at the local and state government, and I was writing about 10 stories a week. So you can imagine if someone came to me with a nicely packaged story with all of the things that I need, that it was a huge help to me. And so I encourage you as you're building your own stories to think about what reporters might need. If you wanted to pitch this, reporters love photos, right? They really need B-roll. So, and we'll talk about video in a second a little bit more, but I always used to laugh that people will click on anything as long as it's a video, like an empty street, here's where this thing happened. And so B-roll is just that. It's just footage without any talking that can be used silently in the background of a story for voiceover and things like that. But being able to provide some of that to reporters so they don't have to come out, it can be a huge help to them. So as you're building your own stories, just keep those thoughts and those ideas as you plan in the back of your mind. Next slide. All right, so let's talk about tools. Infographics are huge. If you're going to use stats, making them feel, again, accessible, relatable, is critical. I don't know if anybody here is familiar with Venngage. It is my favorite resource that we have discovered here at the county. We use it for everything. My personal opinion, no offense to the Canvas and the Adobe Sparks of the world, but I really like it for quicker graphics and templates. They really have everything. So of course they have infographics and flyers and posters. They also have white paper templates, and they have pamphlets, and they have invitations, and they have all sorts of things. And it's got a really great database of options and of icons and everything. So I highly recommend it. There is a free option for it as well. But it's a nice one-stop shop for those very quicker pieces that you need to put together. I still use the full Adobe suite, of course, for more in-depth work. But if you're just looking, or if you don't have a graphic designer or you don't feel strong in your design skills, Venngage really is user-friendly. And I think, Jennifer, we're probably going to share this out with folks. So there's a link there to Venngage. But if you just Google Venngage, how it's spelled here on your screen, you can find that. E-newsletters, if you're going to use them, or I guess printed newsletters, if you're still doing printed newsletters, I always recommend keeping your content blocks short, your stories a little bit shorter when you're doing a written piece, a few 500 words max. but keep them people focused again. And I like to design a newsletter with standing content where people can go and know that they're going to see a certain thing. We all know that, like an Arl Now, their pet of the month, pet of the week is a very popular post, right? People love that sort of thing. So thinking about, again, staff spotlight, if you want to do that, thinking of projects as people, what projects are ongoing, and can you go out and take a couple of photos and do, excuse me, and put that into your newsletter. A construction corner, if you're actually doing tangible work, can really be helpful to give people an update. And then of course, all your, X whatever of the month can be good. But having those short, tight content blocks that people can expect to see every month or whenever you send your newsletters out is really great there. And it tells a much more lively story of your organization than, 3 longer form pieces there. And then your phone is a really good asset. Smartphones really do take high quality video. The built-in iMovie functions are really good and really high quality for what the purposes are. YouTube is a goldmine of tutorials on how to use them. But I will say that, there are, like if you have an iPhone, for example, there are settings on the back where you can, record in 4K, which is a very high quality video, which will play well on a website or YouTube if you have your own YouTube account. And then your phones also have a grid overlay setting on the back end. So that can really help you frame up your subject and really make it a little bit easier to know sort of where you should be standing if you're going to have information, next to somebody on a photo or in a video or things like that. You can sort of frame them where you want to in the photo there. And I will say, I never expected it, but one of the things that COVID-19 gave us is QR codes back in a big way. And never, they were big and then they went away, and the pandemic brought them back. But they really do provide you an opportunity to keep whatever it is that you're putting out, the content that you're putting out, short and direct, and then QR code people back to more in-depth information. For example, if you were to put together a page full of your deep data there, or a white paper, or more information about a program, and you can really start to think about your communication tools as more marketing tools versus full information sharing, because people will pull everything up on their phones nowadays. All right, next slide. But I always say, be flexible. And I mean that in a variety of ways. In first, that you never know what's going to work. So don't be afraid to try it. And don't be afraid to fail. Not everything's going to work. You may try to do a takeover and it just didn't get you the engagement that you were looking for on the back end, and that's okay. And give yourself the opportunity to at least see what resonates with your audience and what doesn't. And if you've tried something and it didn't work, sort of file it away, because as you get new volunteers, new staff, they may have new skills that they can take that and run with it. And if you've at least dipped your toe into the water of a different way of storytelling, you can come back to that there. Next slide. All right, now we're going to talk about sharing your stories. And this is really obviously one of the best opportunities to tell your story, whether that's an interview or you're at an event, like if you have a stand at like a farmer's market or a community event, or you're asked to give a speech. It's really important that you create a focused, prepared presentation. So next slide. There's four steps that I tell people to think about when you're preparing for sharing out your story in the moment. Do your homework, set your agenda, bridge to it, and prevent your information intentionally. Next slide. So when I say do your homework, this does not mean it's going to take hours and hours, but just make sure that you understand if this is a media story, the publication, what program you're going to be talking at, if you're sitting on a panel, giving a speech, and what the medium is going to be. How is your information going to be shared? Is it live and in person? Is it recorded? Those sorts of things. Know who your audience is. understand the type of presentation you're being asked to give. The type of interview is, if you're doing an interview, is it a both on camera Q&A? Is it just a stand-up where the reporter won't be in the final product? Those sorts of things. If it is a media interview, take the moment to Google the reporter and check out their background and find out if they have any experience, not only in writing about nonprofits, but also the subject area that you work in. You know, you work in school programs, education programs, and they're an education reporter, or you work in school programs and education programs, and they're, you know, a crime reporter, right? So just kind of understanding what you're getting in, what they might be coming to the table with there. And then think about who the right person is to get your story across, and who the audience is, and who the reporter is, and what the subject matter is. It may not always be you. It may not always be your communications person, if you have one. It may be somebody, you know, down the line. Maybe it's somebody who has that compelling story to tell and can talk about being a part of your organization from the inside, whether that's a customer, a client, or a staff member there. And then always, always, always think about, what do you want to share that people might not know to ask for? So take a moment and think, what are we doing? What's coming down the horizon that people might not know about yet, that we want to take this opportunity to tell people about and to make sure people are aware of. So always take that moment and just jot down some thoughts and ideas and what you would say about that. Next. So I think about presentations as your agenda. This is presentations, this is interview, this is your story. You can decide how to tell it, and think about what you want them to know. So if you're doing an interview, I say your agenda is, you know, your backwards funnel, or a funnel, I should say, upside down triangle. Your main message is at the top. What is the one thing you want them to take away from your story, from your interview, from your speech? And then your story points, like, what is the actual through line of that story? What are the main points that you want to hit along the way? And then down the line is either your talking points if you're doing an interview, or your script itself. And then at the bottom is whatever questions you might get, whether that's a situation like this, where I'm at the end and I take questions and I don't have any idea what folks may ask me, or you're going to sit down for an interview and you don't have any idea what the reporter is going to ask you. The questions end up being inconsequential in some ways. Everybody always says, when we talk about media interviews, like, oh, I want to know what the questions are. And I say, it doesn't really matter. As long as you know what you want to talk about, then you can answer anything, right? So if you have this really strong and you know which direction you want to go in, or what story you're trying to tell, then if you get a curveball, this will create focus for you. And should things get contentious, or you get some of those more gotcha-y, hard-hitting questions, this would give you your shelter if you needed it. So if you're going to do that, next slide, then you need to know how to bridge to your agenda. So this is how you get from a question to an answer without making it seem like you're avoiding the question. So in not the nonprofit world, you guys are working on solutions and helping and things like that. But often you may be asked, or it may be posed to you as a problem, right? So instead of focusing on the problem, you talk about a solution. Reframe the question, but again, don't get fixated by the question. Your focus is on telling your story. You'll need to practice this a little bit, because it can feel very unnatural if you feel like they ask one thing and then you're saying something completely different. So you need those smooth connecting phrases, things like, what I want to make sure people are aware of is, the important part of the work is, the one thing I want you to keep in mind is, and then you do it that way. And that, again, like I said, can feel unnatural. It can feel a little bit like you're changing the subject. So take some time to think about how you speak normally and what phrases tend to feel more natural, roll off your tongue a little bit more. Because if you choose one that, I might say, but it's not really how you would talk, then it's not going to come across naturally. So just think through that, and you can practice that, of course, as you're, with each other, with your staff, as you're preparing for an event or anything. Practice doing some of these and taking just sort of a random question. I always say, ask somebody like, why is the sky orange, and see how they can get back to talking about their organization, their story that they want to do. And that way it feels out of left field, and you can really focus on your own story. And next slide is presenting information intentionally. Be concise, don't over answer. I really like clear-cut sentences when we're talking. Obviously right now I'm not using clear-cut sentences, but we're in a safe space here. But I really do like, subject, verb, object. Really work hard not to sound very technical. Jargon and acronyms can be very, put some distance between you and your audience. So be engaging. Remember, we are all human, so we should be talking to each other as humans and speaking conversationally, but do be cautious with humor. We all know that humor is in the eye of the beholder. And so we want to make sure that we're re-engaging and we're being approachable, but we're not assuming we know what our audience will find amusing there. All right, next slide. And in conclusion, just always focus on your people when you're telling your stories. Find the why behind all of your stories. Make a plan for how you're going to tell your story. Use your tools to build your story. Remain flexible to try something new. Fail, try again, put it aside, and be intentional with the way you present your stories and the way you present your information to your audiences. And that is all I have. I hope this, at least for many of you, was a good refresher. I'm always happy to take any questions if anything occurs to you. I'm also happy to take questions offline if that is helpful, through Jennifer or Caitlin, if that is helpful as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Erica. Any questions for Erica? All right. Wonderful. Well, thank you. We appreciate that. And thank you all for taking the time. So again, do reach out to us if you have any questions as you're developing your application. And I think Caitlin had posted the direct link to Zoom grants. If that doesn't work, let us know and we'll figure out what's going on. So thank you all. Have a great day. We will send out the presentation and the recording. Bye.
Thank you.